is to just accept that, at some point you just have to move on. Are you feeling maybe slightly overwhelmed or have anxiety at the thought of starting to homeschool your kids? Because maybe you already have a full plate and you're in the thick of it with pregnancies and uh, nursing, sleep deprivation, all of it. And you're thinking, how am I going to add homeschooling to the mix? Well, take a deep breath with me, relax, because you've already been homeschooling since birth. I know you have already taught them several important life skills that they will carry with them the rest of their lives. And this really is no different. This is just a continuation of that. So, what's the best way or most efficient way to start this formal academic journey? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this video. And I want to let you know up front that I do have a bias. And my bias can be summed up with the saying, efficiency is doing things right. However, effectiveness is choosing the right things. As a mother of 6, I have learned that choosing just a few right things that are in line with the end vision that you want will get you a lot farther than spinning your wheels with trying so many different things and having doubts about yourself, about what you're doing, as well as prevent or cure homeschool burnout. Hi there, my name is Karen. If you're new here, welcome. I like to help families like yourselves achieve sustainable and enjoyable homeschooling. Imagine that. Yes, homeschooling can be enjoyable. So in this video, I'm going to share with you 3 main components that I think you should focus your energy on. I know that you don't have a lot of bandwidth during this season of life, so just 3 areas and free resources I'm going to share with you. So not just the what to really focus on, but the how with free resources, as well as just some strategies that I have learned along the way that made a big difference. Number 1 is learning how to read. That is very foundational and no pressure, but it is very important and will set the stage. And depending on how you approach it, can either set you up for success or can create some problems later on. Now, let me explain. I really recommend that you choose a strong phonetic program, something like Alpha Phonics, which is free. You can get that for free on the internet. And I think it's better to slow and steady at their own pace, but making continual progress, really work on alphabet fluency and then progressing with those phonics lessons. The danger can be sometimes parents want to take that shortcut with sight words, and so kind of skip that alphabet fluency part and go right into combining letter combinations and words and sentences. And by bypassing that, not always, but a lot of times, it just leads your kids to be more susceptible to reading disorders, dyslexia, comprehension problems, just problems further down the line. And so you don't want to deal with that later on. It's best to just go back and, start right, take your time using a phonics approach, because if you do down the line run into those types of issues, you're going to have to go back and do some remedial things anyhow. And I always recommend Alpha Phonics for remedial work as well. So it's best to just take your time, slow and steady from the beginning, using a strong phonics program. And I know that some parents like to use methods where you're sort of mixing and matching the two, but just really keep in mind that the first way, the primary way that they learn how to read becomes the dominant way in their brain. And that's very hard to change later on. Just like if you have children, you've seen this, you know this, that once they learn how to write in an incorrect way or write letters in an incorrect way, that's something that's very difficult to change later on. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. It's so much easier if you are just intentional and watching and showing how to write letters and numbers the right way from the beginning. It's just one of those things. It's worth the effort it takes in the very beginning, being intentional about what you're doing, having that game plan, and really thinking about the end vision in mind. This is the most time-intensive component, yes, but it has the most payoff. I mean, once they're strong readers, the world is theirs. They could do whatever they like. They could teach themselves whatever they would like, right? Reading is a superpower. So it's worth the time it takes. But again, it doesn't have to take much time, money, or sanity. Alpha Phonics is free. It's got lesson plans already. You just have to read the script and make sure they're doing it, and the little writing portion at the end of it. I mean, you're done. It really doesn't have to take more than 15, max 20 minutes a day with the writing. So after you have taught them how to read, and high five, because that is a big accomplishment, then you want to encourage them to read as often as they can, as much as possible for practice. And then maybe transition them to a reading list that increases in difficulty. Now, the Robinson curriculum has done such a fantastic job with this. They've done all the work for you, not only giving you the book files, but building that list that increases in difficulty and a vocabulary program to go along with it. And in those first couple years, you have a lot of great books like the McGuffey Readers. You also have some Arthur Scott Bailey books that my kids always enjoy. Yes, they're older books and they don't have a lot of pictures, but they really encourage their imagination, and they're not just great literary stories, but they're also very educational too. A lot of nature in them as well. So it transitions from a lot of fun stories and nursery rhymes. Nursery rhymes are also on the list, and that's very important. And then it increases in difficulty. Now, you can also add some supplemental book titles to add in the mix before they move on to more challenging books. Some of my favorite books, for example, are the Beatrix Potter books. I love those, and they have such great vocabulary. Or the Little House on the Prairie series, Charlotte's Web. I mean, I also love a lot of different picture books for this. If you'd like me to make a list for you, let me know in the comments down below, or maybe I'll make a video on it. But there's just so many great titles and books out there. All right, tip number 2, let's talk about math, because math could be a little tricky here. This is where the Robinson curriculum kind of takes a departure from a lot of the mainstream curriculums. It might seem a little radical, but it's not. I don't think it's a coincidence that in these early years where you're already stretched to your max some days, that it keeps it very, very simple. Just what they really need to know, and that is memorizing their math facts. That is like learning how to read for language arts. For math, it's knowing the math facts. And that's addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And so what the Robinson curriculum recommends is that you mix them all up and they work on memorizing them daily. Once they have them all memorized, they can start their first math textbook, which will be Saxon 54. Now, it's true that children have different capabilities, and some will start at different ages, that first textbook. But your response to this is to just let them go as slow as they need to go. Even if they only complete one problem a day, but they did that problem on their own and corrected themselves, fixed their mistake, then hashtag winning. And just because their pace may be slow in the beginning does not mean that will be the pace for the rest of their homeschooling years. You have to be patient with this process too. Now, admittedly, this is probably the biggest pain point for most families, is the math component. And I understand there could be some frustration there when you have maybe a 7, 8, or 9-year-old still working on math facts. And I myself feel like I've kind of seen it all. I've had kids that just went through the math facts very easily, started 54, no issues, doing great with it. And then I had a couple where maybe it was not so easy peasy, and one that was even diagnosed with some specific memory issues. So I get it. And that's why I'm giving you these 5 tips to get through it. Number 1, consider introducing the facts separately. First, addition or addition subtraction. I have a resource where I introduced math fact families for addition and subtraction. That always worked really well. And then introduce multiplication. And really, if they know multiplication, they will know division. It's just in reverse. So consider introducing them separately. However, you are going to have to, at some point, set up some kind of review system, because the danger is that they will just learn it in their short-term memory, and then you get through this whole schedule or whatever you're doing routine, and then at the end of it, they don't remember the facts from the beginning. So you do have to introduce some sort of review. Now, the RC course of study recommends that once they've mastered them all, the way they review them is the entire stack every day. I do have an alternative method using sort of the CM Bible memory method with the file folder, where every day they're reviewing certain facts. Every day it changes based on the day. So I will link that video down below if you want more information on that, but I go over it more in detail in my course as well. Number 2 is to give them an abacus to start. These are really helpful. I do think it's important for them to see visually what it is that they're doing, what these operations are, what they mean, and let them use it at first to work out the problems. But eventually you do have to take it away because it can become a crutch. Once they get it, once they understand the concepts, then they know they just need to memorize them by rote memory. And actually they will see that it is a lot easier when you're doing multiplication. They will see it if they try to do it on the abacus after a while, like, this would just be a lot easier if I memorized it. So it could be helpful in that way. Number 3 is worksheets. Worksheets can be helpful if they're just centered on math drills, like math fact drills. And Saxon 54 has a great little booklet where it's just math fact drills. And so doing something like this at the start or at the end of their flashcard drilling session can be really helpful. And to go along with that, number 4 is timed anything. Timing them when they get through their math stacks, and them trying to beat their best time, or timing them when they're doing these worksheets. See if they can beat their best time. Whenever you introduce that element of timing something, at first they may not like it, but it's usually just because they don't know it. But once they know the material, it becomes more fun, right? But there's just something about that timed element that really just gets it in their brain. So if you can introduce that, great. And number 5 is to just accept that, at some point you just have to move on. And so it's okay if they're still working on this and you just transition over and start them. With Saxon 54, they don't start multiplication in that book until about lesson 25. So you have a good little while there before they even get to multiplication. So as long as they're really great with addition and subtraction, then they can go ahead and get started. But I would create a little routine for them, such as maybe a timed drill, and then they work on their math flashcards, and then they work on a Saxon lesson, or whatever you'd like to do, kind of play around with it and see how they do best with it. Now, if this sounds like a lot to remember and maybe even still a little bit overwhelming, I know when I was in the thick of it, I just couldn't even really focus on things like this very much. That's why I created my RC course for littles, where I just take you step by step with these little short videos of, okay, now do this, don't move on to the next step until they've done this, and just kind of guiding you along the process with all of the free resources already there in the course for you, but also just kind of reflecting back on things that I wish I would have done differently. I'm able to share that with you in the course. And in the bonuses, I have some topics that I really don't see talked about in the online homeschool community space, such as, teaching observation, curiosity, because that's really going to help with self-teaching curriculums, that determination, that self-motivation, as well as the work study habit, how to develop good work ethic, because that's all school is. It's also work. And so you need to have both sides of the coin. So I talk about all those things in bonus videos, in addition to just the academic step by step. So I will leave a link down below if you'd like to check that out. Now, let's talk about number 3, which is writing. Now, writing should really go hand in hand with learning how to read. That's why I've integrated the two into one component in my course. So at the end of each phonics lesson, have them do some kind of writing. Alpha Phonics has them do some kind of writing. At the end of reading something, maybe you'd want them to do some copy work. Copy work is great up until the age of 10. That's what RC Course of Study recommends. But as far as from the very beginning, you want to teach them how to write letters, how to form them correctly. And Don Potter has some fantastic free resources. That's what I use in my course, Shortcut to Manuscript and Shortcut to Cursive. And so I recommend you start with manuscript first, and then you can transition over to the cursive part. But just taking your time and being intentional and showing them how to write each letter correctly. I would not recommend you just give them copybooks and just hope they get it and figure it out on their own. Those are great to use, but only after you've shown them how to write everything correctly, because this is one of those things. Once they learn how to do it wrong, it's really hard to get them to switch. So another area where you just need to be a little bit more intentional and just actually watch them and show them how to write letters correctly. Because again, if they write letters in a distorted way, they can view them in a distorted way. So just something to keep an eye on. Now, I have a whole video planned in my head on the pre-K years, both just for mom in general, having a good mindset and some tips, self-care and everything to get through it, but also just some small things you can do in those early pre-K years to really set the stage for this other stage later on, that beginning formal academic time. There's some things that you can do to sort of prepare the soil. So if you'd like to see that video, let me know down below, because I don't want to make it unless there's an interest for it. So just comment down below and you can write the word pre-K and I will work on it. Plutarch once said, "The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled." And that's the biggest takeaway I'd like for you to have from this video. It's more important that you help develop an interest and joy for the act of learning than to try and get them to remember your lessons. As a teacher of young children, your primary goal should be to teach them how to learn and to inspire them to love learning. So if you do have children between the ages of 4 and 8 and you like this minimalistic but very effective approach to self-teaching homeschool methodology later on, then I invite you to join me in that RC course for littles. And while you wait for next week's video, you can head on over to this video that kind of gives you that end vision, that end goal, end result that we are striving for. And yes, how this minimalistic approach can get you there. That self-teaching methodology that is so beneficial, not just for the kids, not just for mom, really the whole family can benefit from a program, from homeschooling in this sustainable and enjoyable way. So I'll see you over in that video. Talk to you soon. Bye.